Oh my goodness.
Good evening, welcome to the Wednesday, March 4th Town Council Work Session, Town of Pleasant Beach. The meeting is called to order. Mr. Lehman is at another meeting in Arlington County right now, he won't be here. That's the roll call. And is there a motion to approve the agenda? Is there a second?
Second.
Frank?
Aye.
Pat?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Ms. Roberson?
Aye.
Ms. Shea?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. Is there approval of the minutes for January 16, 2019, the regular meeting?
So moved. I have a question just on minutes. We're over a year behind. We've got extra help now, and we've never been this far behind.
We're not a year behind.
January 16, 2019.
We're done. This January 16th, 2019 is one more set of minutes, and that'll complete everything for 2019.
Okay, I was wondering, because I
2019
looked
is
at the
done.
year, the month before
Yeah,
that.
this
I'm like,
one
wait a
was
minute.
just kind of pushed
Something's
back.
not adding up. Okay.
Yes.
That
yes.
makes much more sense.
No, we're not a year behind.
Thank you.
We're behind. I'm not,
Yeah.
you know,
And the help
but
has
it's
made
not
a
a
huge
year
difference
behind.
to it.
Second on the motion.
Yes, okay.
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Mr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Sir? Ms.
Aye.
Roberson? Ms. Shea?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Okay, so we're fortunate tonight to have a presentation on our fiscal year 2019 audit presentation. Aaron B. Hawkins, Robinson, Farmer, Cox Associates. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me this evening.
You bet. Looking forward to great news.
Yeah, that's you know, I would ideally we would have been here back in December, but it's better late than never to get it done. And I want to thank the town staff for staying diligent, working through the process. It's never easy when you have a new accounting system being implemented, and you have a combination of that with moving pieces within the staff and town management as well. And so that all kind of played a part in getting, not having this to you in the report by the end of November and reporting it to you in December at your meeting, and why we're doing it so late. But without further ado, I'm going to kind of just go into the report. I did not do a PowerPoint presentation like I did last year. It's something I do every once in a while, not something I normally do, and it's I felt like it may have just created a little more confusion than what I was trying to talk about. So I'm going to kind of do what my normal routine would be, which is just I've flagged certain pages within the report. We'll all flip to those pages. I've flagged ones that I think are just kind of important pages, things that are worthy of pointing out to your attention. And then obviously along the way you can stop me and ask questions. If I skip over a page, you can stop me for that too. And then obviously we'll go over any questions at the end. I also handed out two separate letters which are separate from the audit, one of which is a management letter. That's the one-page document. We utilize that document to identify things that we think are, we can use it for different things, but in this case it's a few areas that we thought could be internal control improvements within the town, the things that didn't rise to the level of needing to be reported in the financial report as a finding or anything like that. The governance letter, I think, is a 2 or 3 page document, which is basically a standard letter that we have to send out at the conclusion of the audit, that basically describes our roles as the auditors, your role as the auditee, any disagreements with management, material entries, things like that. So, and page 1 is our auditor's report within the financial statements. Everything that follows this is the town's financial statements, but this is our page, or say 3 pages as auditors, to give our opinion on those financial statements. And our opinion actually comes on page 2, which is a little paragraph there at the top, which basically says that based on the testing that we did, we feel that the financial statements that follow this are free of any material misstatement. It's an unmodified opinion, which is, in our opinion, and as auditors, the best opinion that we can give. The second paragraph on that second page describes a change in accounting principle during the year, changed how certain forms of debt, how they're classified, what they're called. I don't believe that it really affected the town any. There are certain types of debt that used to be called a note payable or something like that that's now called a direct borrowing or direct placement. But from my recollection, I don't believe that affected any of the outstanding debts that the town had. Next page I'm going to turn to is page 8. Your basic financial your fund financial statements began on page 6, but page 8 shows the changes in your fund balances during the year. I know you, as members of council, that's something that you typically are aware of. What's our fund balance? And so the general fund balance began the year just shy of $2 million, ended the year just above $2.4 million. So a change in $486,184 to be exact on your general fund balance for the year. Capital Projects Fund, just a marginal increase, which was based on, I believe, for the excess funding at the school board, half of that used to be committed to for future developments within the Capital Projects Fund. So that's what that transfer is. And then no activity in the Erosion Fund. The next page I'm going to turn to is page 11, which does a similar thing for your proprietary funds. You don't actually call those fund balances, they're called net position for the type of funds that they are. But the water fund, the net position increased $362,284, bringing you just shy of $3 million at the end of the year. Sewer went down just slightly, $18,108 in net position. Next page I'm going to turn to is page 64. And when I showed you that page initially that had your changes in your general fund balance for the year, this gives you a little more detailed information as to what drives those numbers. And it gives it to you on a comparative basis. Original budget, final budget, and actual would be it, and then the positive or negative variance of the actual compared to your budget. Revenues were $250,000 in excess of what was budgeted. Expenditures roughly about the same under budget of the final appropriated amount.
So we spent $250,000 less
Yeah, exactly.
250,000 more in revenue.
So yeah, so really the total positive variance was about $500,000 since you were $250 over your revenues and then $250 under your expenditures.
The main increase in revenue was from delinquent. Did we pursue delinquent taxes?
I believe that had to do with the supplement that had to be sent out.
Oh, I see. Right.
This should take into effect the tax increase as well, right?
That's what it was. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Is that a normal place to call it, delinquent?
Yeah.
It's kind of misread.
Yeah, I may have to look into that for you. It's possible that could be incorrect and that it should be up there with just the normal real property.
Real
Somebody
property
looks at that
tax.
next year
Yeah.
and says we collected that much in delinquent when you add it all up.
Yeah, that's,
It's certainly possible.
What would roughly be the miscellaneous, just?
I'm sorry?
The miscellaneous, $130,000 negative, what would that generally be? Don't go into detail.
It could be that you guys just thought you were going to get something that you appropriated money for, and then you just didn't get whatever that was. I mean, I don't remember that
I'm not
offhand,
asking
but
you to do it.
I certainly could get back to you on it. And if we need to reprint this page for you and send out some new reports, we can do that. Based on that delinquent tax line.
I just don't think it looks very good.
On the revenue, yeah.
Alright, the next page I'm going to flip ahead to is page 79, which is where you see another one of our pages is auditors. 79 and 80 is our report on our internal control testing that we did. And within this opinion, we actually do describe 3 findings that we'll discuss later at the end of the report. Identified in that last paragraph on the page 79 as items 2019-001, 2, and 3. And then on page 80, the top paragraph on that, we have a compliance finding that we had to report, which is being identified as item 2019-004. And we'll go over those more in depth here momentarily. Pages 81 and 82 is our opinion on the federal compliance testing that we performed for the town. The town receives over $750,000 in federal assistance during the year, which makes them makes it necessary for the town to receive a single audit. And our opinion was unmodified based on the testing that we did. I'm now going to go to page 86, which is where we'll talk about those findings that I mentioned minutes ago. A couple of these were findings that existed last year as well, the first 2. The first one is one that's probably always going to be tough for the town to overcome based on its size, which is about segregation of duties and certain individuals who have to basically perform tasks that they overlap things that, as an accountant, you wouldn't like to see in an internal control structure that has enough individuals to separate those functions. And finding 2019-002 was a finding last year as well, and I believe this finding was due to audit adjustments that had to be proposed during the course of the audit. I do think there may have been some improvement in that area. I definitely think there was actually from last year, but we did still have auditor proposed adjustments that we had to do. We'll talk about some of those specifically within the governance letter. We highlight some of those items. But ideally, when you come into an audit, you'd love to never have any proposed entries. It's rare that happens at any town, county, or city that I go to in the state. But there was enough here that it was necessary to report it as a finding. I see 2019-003. This was a new finding during the year, and one that I have to admit was kind of a bit troubling in that there were deposits that were received, or cash that was received, I should say cash and check, that was received by the town on or before June 30th, but that weren't deposited into the bank until sometime later in July and August. So you had monies that were, sitting within the town hall. I would presume within a safe, a lock safe or something like that, but still just cash that wasn't making it to the bank in a timely manner. And anytime you have that situation exists, it creates an obvious weakness, and I'm led to believe that has been resolved and that's not an issue any longer going forward, but it was still something that definitely needs to be pointed out here as something that we saw when we were doing the audit. And then the last finding, 2019-004, we had to report a finding. This is a Commonwealth of Virginia finding. We have to do certain things within the audit that are compliance for, we talked about federal compliance earlier when we gave our opinion on the single audit, but we also have to do state compliance on certain things, and one of those is making sure that the budgets for both the school board and the town give proper notice to the population or the citizens within the town that there's going to be a public hearing, and the school board has to give 10 days notice in the newspaper before they have their public hearing for their budget, and they advertised their hearing on March 21st, 2018, and then had the hearing on 26th, so only gave 5 days notice when the requirement's 10 days. But I believe that has been corrected for FY20. And then the last 2 pages are just where we are putting in here the findings that existed last year. Like I said earlier, that the first 2 existed last year as well. The third one from last year had to do with the annual school report, having to have a material adjustment to agree with what they reported to the state, but that finding had corrective action during FY19.
So, every year, we've had the segregation of duties come up for the town. And, I just don't know, we don't have enough people to really, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's something that happens at other towns,
Right,
other
okay.
sides as well, for sure. But also, I do think it may have even gotten. I'm not as in tune as to what it is right now as the town as it was when I was doing field work, but I feel like that may be getting even worse than what it was, and so it's something that I do think there needs to be some attention in that direction, and there may have already been for all I know, but it's something that I would want to mention versus not mention while I sit here.
Okay. Okay. Noted.
And additionally, is one thing that the town will want to make sure is, and when it comes to the staff turnover that's been involved, is it stretches the staff that's currently there pretty thin, and being able to get done all the things that they have to do. One area of concern for me is always cash and reconciling bank accounts, and the town could be behind on reconciling bank accounts, and it's no fault of necessarily the people that are there. I'm sure they're staying busy and doing with all that they can do, but those types of things can create a weakness, especially if you're far behind. And I'm sure you all receive monthly financial reports probably, and those things are only worth something if the bank accounts are reconciled. Otherwise, it's kind of just numbers on a piece of paper with not much substance. Having those bank accounts reconciled makes sure that, at least to a degree, that the information you're getting is complete. So, just to continue to stress to, make sure that the town is well staffed there, and that getting caught up on, because I still think there's also issues with the accounting system. I mean, I'm glad that we were able to get through the audit and get things presented to you, but there's a really good chance we'll be having the same problem next year if there really isn't an attention and a focus put on and making sure that the staff is well stocked to be able to handle challenges.
I think, we had spoken about the changes in the staff happening, and that was because we were far behind, and, we knew we needed time to catch that up. And we prioritized the audit as first, and then we will get to the rest. So, just to Lisa, I know that we up here understand that we needed to get this done, and but we had an expected date to be caught up within, I think, the next month. Is that right? As far as reconciliation.
Yeah, we expected with the additional staff that we put on that towards the end of this month, maybe early August, and we're caught up with all reconciliatory efforts, which was the prime thing that finance was lagging in.
Are we on track to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we should be getting now, town council should be getting now monthly reports once that is. See, we have not been getting monthly reports because reconciliation has been behind.
Gotcha.
And you're right, they're useless, so why would we get them?
Right. Yeah.
They don't mean anything. So that will be now able to happen. But it was a process to
Yeah.
work on that.
Go ahead.
One of the big things to note is the business taxes decrease. I mean, by a third.
Business licensing.
Uh-huh.
Well, it's because we're not enforcing it.
Well, that was for 2019, that's not even this year.
I know, but I mean, it's been going on for years.
On page 64,
Was also on the revenue.
I'm
The
sure.
other one was permits.
Yeah, permits and business licenses. So I'm glad that we made up the revenue and the real estate tax, will be
Yeah,
increased taxes,
it's kind of
but,
false game.
yeah. There are several members up here, this is only our second time looking at a town audit, so, and it's being the first, like, literally just given to us right now. I don't know if there's anything else that you should share with us, if we read through it.
Sure.
Well, take a look, I think, the local sales tax and the food and lodging tax, is a good indicator of the economic and activity increase thereof.
Well, the permit fees should go down because we don't pay Westmoreland County, or we pay Westmoreland County for, I'll go ahead and talk about that now.
Well, I mean, they just collect their portion, we still do.
They do,
We're not paying.
yeah.
We don't pay
Yeah,
them.
we don't pay them.
Well,
We don't get any.
we don't get it.
We don't get any.
Right, but it
That's
doesn't
why-
cost us
Right,
either.
that's why it's down, but I'm just saying,
Yeah, but we should have
We
We figured
budgeted,
that, we figured that last year, budget.
yeah, we should have budgeted knowing that we weren't gonna get that.
It was budgeted before that decision was made.
Yeah. Oh, it was?
Yes.
No.
The budget was already produced for the
From
revenue,
2018.
for the permits. It
Uh-huh.
was
Okay.
already done before they moved.
So this year we will be able to.
Yes.
okay. That makes sense.
So that's what we lost in moving that to the
I
county.
need to check that, because I don't think it's correct,
But we don't have a building inspector and we don't pay a building inspector
Right,
now.
but we did go ahead and increase our budget and planning and so forth, even though without the revenue, we didn't run that up. This is one that's just really looking.
There were adjustments made last year and you had pointed out where you made the adjustments last year. What page should I be looking at for that?
That's actually going to be, at least for the material adjustments in the governance letter, which is the stapled document that has 3 pages in it. On the second page is where we disclose any material adjustments that we had to do. There were more adjustments than that, but these were the only ones that were adjusting and that were of a material nature. Town staff has been provided with a full list of all of our proposed entries, as well as what we call a working trial balance, which is where we take the trial balance that's initially given to us, and then we apply our proposed entries to arrive at the final amounts per audit that goes into your financial statements. The accounts payable items kind of almost offset each other. We found some items that, and when I say accounts payable, that means that invoices that you've received as of June 30th, or you may have even received them in some cases after June 30th, if it was for services in June that you didn't pay until July and August. We found some that weren't recorded and pulled back to FY19. But then we also found some that were that shouldn't have been, and so that's what the second item, or excuse me, the third item and the fourth item are. And so we removed $45,000 some odd dollars, and then found an additional 38. So it was almost a wash, but
Still.
What is GAS B68?
so GASB 68 was when we had a standard that was implemented
that's
for
when
VRS.
Well, it's, at least face value, it's refreshing to have extra money, or not extra money, but to not have overspent our monies.
Yeah, I think from a financial standpoint and where you sat at the end of the year, I think there's a lot of positive things to take away from this report in terms of how you perform versus your budget and just the overall increase in your fund balance. Where your fund balance sits at the end of the year. Normally I recommend that a locality have 15% of their annual expenditures, which I believe you all are in excess of that threshold that I usually.
We expected to have
That
a
was the
positive
purpose.
fund, that was the additional couple cents
Right.
in taxes, so we can't
Well,
count that as savings.
I can,
We count that as-
we were typically spending roughly 9% more than we were taking in previously, so, you know, even if what we were doing was right and we weren't projecting correctly, at least now, it's not only level, but it's a little positive, which is a good starting point.
Right.
Yes, yeah,
Let's just make sure we don't pat ourselves on the back for the
right.
slush fund we're supposed to be creating. Let's
Yeah,
not get
yeah.
all fat and happy and go out and start spending money.
It doesn't look like we overspent money either, so.
Correct.
You know, which is also good, so we didn't spend all the new tax money, which we know we need that for a rainy day as well, so. I mean, there's a lot of positives, we still have some cleaning up to do, there's no doubt about it, we know that. I will say, I wanna say thank you to you, Lisa, and your staff, because I know you guys, that's quite the turnover, right in
Yes.
the middle of everything. And I know that's not only the turnover, but the turnover with the new program that you were using as well, and then the personnel issues and the change in personnel, right in the heart of all this,
Yeah.
which is always very difficult. And new people, brand new people coming on board, that were able to at least get us to the point that we are today. I know we're a little late in terms of the December date, but it looks like we'll have this by May, right? It'll be done. Everything will be okay. Yeah. Okay.
Sooner than that,
Yeah.
we should be getting reports next month. I
Right.
think.
Okay. Good. Well, it's March, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only other thing I haven't talked about yet is the separate management letter, which is the one-page document that you all have here. And as I mentioned earlier, these are for items that are internal control improvements that didn't rise to the level of needing to be a finding. We had initially, in the draft that we had sent out, we had one item related to school board that I was able to resolve this afternoon, which was kind of a late change to this management letter from what, I don't know if a draft may have circulated, but that was able to be resolved from discussions with the folks at the school board to something that we weren't aware of when we did our testing, and kind of a communication error on our part, I think. So, but I will talk about these few items that are here. The first item was on council minutes. When we were trying to do our field work, one thing we have to do is read council minutes, which isn't always the most fun thing to do, but it's something that we have to do. And in this case, we weren't able to at times, or we weren't able to get very far because there was a bit of a lag time, especially I think at the preliminary field work that we did. But so it's just a recommendation to try to keep those up to date. The second item was customer accounts for utilities. When we're doing our testing and internal controls testings, we do a walkthrough of the processes and how you get from point A to point B within various systems. And for utilities, right now it looks like there's probably a little bit of a weakness there, where a certain individual could be able to do an adjustment without necessarily having to have that adjustment approved. And so I recommend that anytime you're doing adjustments to utility accounts, that those things get approved. And there's a couple ways you can do it. You could do it every single time you do an adjustment, which for some places that can be not something that's feasible, because you're dealing with so many things all the time. And what they'll do is, as they do adjustments during the month, they keep a log of them, and then at the end of the month a member of management will just approve that log, and maybe they'll look through the sheets that were done during the year. That's one way to do it. Or like I said before, if it's not too big of a volume when it comes to adjustments, you could literally just have each one have a form prepared when there's going to be an adjustment to a utility account, and either the town manager or someone else separate from that function could review it.
Is this part of Edmonds? No? No.
Okay.
Okay.
And then the third item was on emergency purchases. The town during the year had to make an emergency purchase of a 2017 Ford F-350, and basically when we couldn't really find anything. I think we saw that there was town manager approval over it, but when in the case of an emergency purchase that kind of goes around the normal purchasing requirements of the town, you'd like to see that council was aware of it, and you guys may have been, but we just couldn't see that from the minutes that we were able to review, as well as just kind of going down the rabbit hole of looking for maybe some kind of maybe an email or something like that to at least make us feel better about it. But basically, anytime in the rare instance that you do have to have an emergency purchase, just making sure that it's documented within your council minutes and that you discussed it and approved it as a group. So that concludes the management letter.
Are our water and sewer revenues picking up like they're supposed to be for the utility escrow?
It seemed that way, and
Where's the net? So we basically went from 11.8 to 12.2. From year to end year.
So the sewer is down, the water is up.
but the sewer might have, that's net, so I don't know, did we make a purchase in sewer that was?
Well, one line that's gonna tell a lot is your depreciation line, which for water only has 99,894,
Right.
but for sewer you're expensing really that's stuff that you purchased years ago.
Right.
You're just you're realizing an expense every year, and so that's sort of outside of your. It's within your operating expenses, but it's it's not something that's a day-to-day expense, I guess I'll say.
I don't know what we anticipated that escrow to be at. We basically picked up 400 grand last year to this year.
Well, that would be in the back there, wouldn't it?
I'm not sure what exact date the new water and sewer rates went in that we started creating. It wasn't a whole year.
No, it was only half a year.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Or was it even half a year? Was it a quarter? It was just a quarter of the year.
I think the bills went out in, was it August, so the bills for the last quarter were probably.
And I think part of that was because we were gonna project that with that depreciation on there, we were not gonna be able to meet. So with the new bill,
Yeah, the goal, of course, was to put the escrow in place to rainy day fund, whatever you want to call it.
I think in water and sewer, we didn't raise it high enough to add another.
Part of the raise, as we figured out, the rate increase we figured with Gladys was to include that.
I don't think so, but maybe we remember that maybe differently.
Let me just check them.
Actually, about the same time, July tax amount, didn't it?
That was, I think, one cycle before that. Just one,
So
yeah,
it should be
just
different
one
this
of
year.
the wealthy.
Yeah, for the whole year of it.
Yeah. But see, for this year, we budgeted the rate increase. So,
To meet the budget, to meet the budget.
Right.
And then, but we also did include the excess, but it hasn't built up.
right.
And I don't think anybody's gonna be interested been another water and sewer increase to try to
No.
gain an escrow.
No.
You shouldn't have
So
to.
it's gonna be interesting to see how it comes in the future. When we already start looking at that quarter here.
Yes.
I don't think we'll have to, I hope. I hope so. Any questions for Aaron?
Well, that's an independent account, so it'll show it.
Do you find that Edmonds been a positive change for us? I know it was hard for this year. Do you think that's gonna be, do you see other clients that are also switching to Edmonds? Is that
We do. I am aware of another town that has made a similar switch from Bright to Edmonds. I don't personally audit that town. I think it's the town of Tappahannock made that switch. They could be a good resource potentially for you as well to reach out to. I haven't been hearing about. They seem to have had an easier transition, but they're also smaller than you guys. But they have done that, I believe,
Tappahannock
from
is not smaller than us.
Tappahannock.
Should be.
I thought that they were.
Oh.
At least population-wise, they are for
Maybe
sure.
residents
I was
wise.
gonna say, they got a bigger commercial district, but they may not have the
They may not have
Could be more
residential.
accounts.
Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. Like I said, I don't work on that audit, so I could definitely be wrong. I just, for whatever reason, my mind thought that they were smaller. But in my opinion, how is it going? That's still to be determined. I mean, anytime you switch accounting systems, there's going to be kinks in the road. But until you always worry a little bit until you get to the goal road ahead, where everyone feels comfortable and everything's reconciled and everything's just moving like clockwork. And so, I continue to say just that does need to be a focus because once you get there, I think you'll be fine. But if you let yourself stay behind and get further behind, it just gets harder to dig yourself out. But I do know other clients that necessarily haven't switched to Edmonds, but that have been on Edmonds since I began auditing them, and Edmonds works just fine for them.
Yeah, and Bright just didn't offer new technology.
No, I understand.
We reached out as much as we could, just to do some change, make some basic changes.
Right.
Yeah.
I
I can't have any other questions because I
The
can't.
residents have their own problem.
And as your auditors, I make myself available
Yeah.
after tonight, too. So.
We have any questions?
Got more commercial district.
Yeah. You guys have any questions? Well, thank you very much for being so diligent again for us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks again to the town staff for helping us get here. So, it was a battle for everybody, and glad we were able to get to the end.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it.
Have a good evening.
We might call you if any council members have a question.
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
call you back.
Anytime.
All right, so next on the agenda is Castlewood Park, and I asked that this be on the agenda. I know we talked about it at the last meeting. We had asked to see if we could start some movement with moving stuff from Castlewood to Eleanor so that we could start making some money at Castlewood. And I guess we run into a couple little headaches, or hiccups, whatever you want to call them. But I think they're minor, and I think we still need to stay in tune and try to keep moving forward with this. Yeah.
I took a look, I looked down there too, after the last meeting, and I think before we start moving equipment stuff, we need to get a plan from Howard or somebody. There's some obstacles down there. We can't just take it out, throw gravel down and start using it, because the storm ditches on the Monrovia Avenue side are an issue. I don't know if we turn the direction of the parking or something, but I think there needs to be a plan done of the thing before we start just taking equipment out. I think it was a concept idea that we had talked about, but we've never really planned or done a drawing to see what's feasible. We've got the bathhouses down there, we've got some other things down there. And I think we probably need to at least do an initial layout and see what some of the obstructions are before we just go gangbusters and start moving equipment.
Apparently there's a wellhead down there.
Yep.
That's a concern. And I understand all that. I just, again, I just want to, so I guess Quinn has looked into some cost. I guess there was as much as $10,000 cost to do a preliminary
Yes.
engineering study of Eleanor Park to
Yes.
the layout and all that kind of stuff.
That's correct. There's some history, I think, back before CB Greenspace was CB Greenspace and there was CB Friends of Eleanor Park. They were in conversation with the engineer, Mr. Howarth, about a site survey. In order, very similar to Torrey Smith, before you can do anything, you have to have a site survey. It has to be. And they were in that discussion, and then kind of, I think that there was a little bit of a pause because the number was around 10,000. But after council redirected us in our last meeting, I reached out to Mr. Steve Kennedy and met with him, I think, a day or two right after the meeting, explained to him, because it seemed like he was kind of trying to take the bull by the horns. So I kind of explained to him the dynamic that, hey, in order for anything to occur, you have to get this site plan, and give him the point of contact for Mr. Howell, so he could pursue that, and he should be able to make that contact. I spoke with Mr. Howell today. As of yet, they have not touched base with each other. But Mr. Howell knows that he should be getting contacted here very shortly about that site plan at Eleanor. In addition to that, I also shared with him the people that we believe it's Allrec, the people who did the playground initially. I think the company's name is Allrec. And we gave him the point of contact information with that as well, to see that once that site plan does get established and the desire to move the Castlewood playground material over to Eleanor Park, they would probably be the company best suited for it, because that's where we got it. So he's been equipped with that information as well.
Yeah.
Is it our intention to move the equipment resulted initially from wanting to make more boat parking?
Any parking, yeah.
Parking,
Yeah,
whatever.
however we can. Yeah.
So but now what I hear is that we're putting all of our eggs on getting the site plan for Eleanor figured out before we can even figure out the parking aspect down at
Well,
Castlewood. So my point is this, if it's not feasible to create the parking, or if it comes to a point that the wellhead, the storm drainage, the this, the that, becomes a bigger issue than moving the equipment, do we rethink it and just add equipment to Eleanor and leave that there or not? So my question would be is we need to really determine the feasibility of the parking lot at Castlewood before we decide whether to move that equipment or just buy new equipment for Eleanor, I would think.
And you're right, and we may end up, if we can't move it, if it's not worth moving.
Right.
Because of its age and not only, well, we may, the problem is, so we got a lot of citizens who want some kind of revenue.
I agree, but my
Come
point
in
is
because
it
of the
feasible?
laws.
I don't know that we've proven that it's really
Right.
feasible yet. The
Yeah.
more I look at it,
Right.
the weirder it gets.
And these are the answers that I was hoping we would have, and I think we're gonna get, hopefully sooner than later. You put your eyes on it, Rob. I mean, what's your thoughts?
Well, and I believe that there are some significant challenges with tightening up parking, making more parking up in there.
Okay.
We do have a playground right now, and it does have a restroom facility, even though it isn't the greatest. But we have been trying to do some upgrades to it.
Yeah.
And I do have concerns about both of that wellhead, and you also have a valve pit there also, and just encroachment. Now the wellhead is more of an environmental thing. They all have, with parking lots, you tend to have oil leakage and things like that, and the way the drainage is there, half of it ends up over in that direction, as of right now. So I think that they would, I don't like environmentally potentially impacting that well, and that standard is normally 50 feet minimum.
Well, this is what we need to know, because if we're gonna go back to square one, then we gotta figure out what we're gonna do with
Cause it looked like we went,
How do we make up revenues?
it looked like we went into just how much it would cost to move the equipment before we looked at
Right.
what are we gonna get if we move the equipment and what's it gonna cost to improve that into a parking lot, and is it worth it?
Right.
And that's kinda what I saw when I took a close look at it last week.
I think it's important to pursue both avenues, getting Howitt on board to get a site plan of Castlewood and seeing what can happen there. The cost at Eleanor of a site plan there was to include the wish list of that at that time of like, what if we needed restrooms there and a pavilion there and actually to make it sort of, that way we had a site plan that included all of the dream list, and then if we started implementing it in pieces, then fine. But Howard bought out David Baird and Seal and all that, so that he has that drawing
Oh,
of
yeah,
that
he's
site
got it.
plan.
Yeah, he's got
So
it.
just to put the playground on it and not doing our dream list for that, it could be a $10,000 site plan. So that's one part of it. And certainly, I think, you know, we should be working with Steve. We shouldn't just be giving it to Steve and then Kennedy
No,
and then
and
saying,
Which
good
leads-
luck.
Which leads me to another thing, which is this group over here should be directly involved.
Yeah,
That's-
absolutely.
That what we're gonna hopefully button up tonight, at least at some level, should be directly involved in this. And it looks like I saw
Stuff
Mr.
that's
Kennedy's
already
name
there.
on this list as part of your group.
He is part of the group, and that's part of it, and I met with him about stuff like that. I mean, we haven't discussed
Okay.
site plans and stuff like that yet, because we haven't officially become a commission.
Right.
I mean,
No,
once
we
we're
don't.
in meetings, stuff like that is what would come to us and
Right.
recommendations from that.
Okay.
And we don't have a lot of setback issues or anything there, because the rec equipment does not fall under
Right.
the same
Yeah.
setbacks and stuff, so it's just more of a layout.
But we should lay out parking,
No,
you know.
It's
I
not
mean,
a, like I say, it's not more of an RPO or 100%.
no, yeah, none of those issues,
Exactly.
yeah, none of those issues. It should be considerably more simple than the other
So,
concept.
one idea was to add extra adult playground equipment, you know, the stuff that, you know.
Sorry.
That's okay.
That's all right.
Okay, I probably could choose a different way to say that, but, anyway, yeah, so, the pull-up bars and things like that, okay, so, and I think, which are, yeah, sorry. Anyway,
I know that there was some interest when, Gary Mitchell was our planning director, and I'm gonna like zoom over to Richard here, that there was really accessible grant money to implement workout stations.
That's correct.
Really accessible grant money to implement workout
Steve has
stations.
looked into that again as well, too.
Okay, great, so, and maybe there needs to be a little bit of coordination with the planning and development, because a lot of those grant initiatives were through planning and development sort of avenues. And VDOT, I know, also has avenues in that. Not that we need to wait for grant money, but I'm just saying some of those were like from corporations, not from government entities. They were more simple. They were not the elaborate DHCD mess, you know, it was,
well, I think you made a really good point earlier too, that this doesn't all have to happen at once. This should actually happen in stages so that we can actually better be prepared for exactly what it is we want. Moving the equipment up there was just the first phase of actually getting something started.
right.
And hopefully freeing up, land we could generate revenue on in parking.
I mean, I think he's right though on the moving it. Before you're gonna even think about moving it, you have to find out if you can do anything with it. Because, I mean, to me, that's important, because if you can't
Yeah,
make
do
it
it
a parking
right,
lot,
let's
then
leave
why
it.
are we even talking about moving it?
Yeah,
I don't
we
want
just
that
buy
to
new
do.
for railroad
Right,
cars.
yeah, I agree.
So that is, to
Because
me,
it does
I agree
get
with
used a
priority.
lot.
You have to find out
It
if you
does.
can make it a parking lot. And if not,
And
right.
I'm personally a really big fan of Castlewood right this minute because my 7-month-old fits in those toddler swings. They are installed backwards though, and somebody should fix that. He has to face towards poor Mr. Trivets' house the whole time instead of facing towards the water.
Well, that would be fun.
Not that Teach is particularly upset about it, but I would like to face the other direction to push him. So, it's just the wrong one, that's it. Anyway, that was somebody said I should be able to do something about that, so.
You just did.
I think I might be able to do something.
So you, can you go down and give us
Yeah, okay.
a decent report on, just tell us what you think can and can't happen down there, and then we'll just start moving
Okay,
forward.
and was he gonna, should we contact, Albrecht, cause I wanna see what they say about moving this thing.
Sure, I mean, we can reach out as well. And to the point about the reduced footprint at Elmore Park initially to reduce down on the cost, I kind of preemptively told Jeff to expect something much more smaller in scope.
Right.
So he's prepared as soon as he gets, in contact with them. So.
Okay.
But yeah, we started checking a little bit on the well already,
Okay.
on the 50-foot.
Yeah, you just can't sit empty like that.
So, what was your vision as far as how far to extend the park?
The park,
Through the park?
parking.
The parking all the way through?
Yeah, see, that's the thing, is I think we've gotta look at that, because,
Yeah.
depending on what direction, what type of parking, there's a lot of obstacles.
Ins and outs.
Exactly, that's the biggest thing, and coming on Monroe Bay Avenue, that's the biggest problem.
I have 4 diagrams, and I'm happy to send them to you.
I like something that takes into consideration.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah, no, I agree, and I still think that could draw it up and all of that, but you can just see a couple optional layouts.
I mean, we may want to consider reconfiguring the thing as well,
Absolutely,
where
Mm-hmm.
the trailers are more towards the
Yeah.
triangle and have.
Maybe we should be
single
looking at
bed.
it holistically.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a possibility. I mean, if we can use the new area by adjusting the parking layout of the old area, we need to know that.
Mhm.
But if we can't use it at all,
Right, then
we need to know that.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we're on the same page then? Okay, awesome, thank you. Anything else in this, guys? Okay.
Glad to see for at least continuing to discuss it and, looking at action on that.
Right. We do have some new business here we have to do tonight, and it's the budget timeline, our fiscal year 2021 budget timeline. And it's tab A in your book, it's resolution number 11-20. And it's the verbiage for what we're gonna be doing next, the next budget cycle. And we have gone through some of this. We're up to March. Or are you gonna have the budget request? Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, so far, everything on the timeline, we're up to date.
Okay,
In terms of the budget
that's the
timeline,
question.
we're up to
All
date.
right, good.
I think the only real takeaway and change is you're seeing an April 15th presentation date.
Yeah.
That's earlier than last year. We think that there's some goodness to getting that started, to give council a chance to make any if council chooses to have any, adjustments to what is presented via budget, then we have time to execute before. Also, we get to make fun decisions because we're finally now in a net position, as the auditor mentioned, that and to Mr. Serby's point and to council's point, we didn't create play money, but we certainly are in a position where we get to make much favorable decisions that could positively affect the town as well.
Very good. So resolution 11-20, fiscal year 2021 budget timeline. Is there a motion to approve that?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Mr. Alger?
Aye.
Mr. I?
Aye.
Mr. Serby?
Aye.
Ms. Roberson?
Aye.
Ms. Schick?
I,
Chair votes aye. Okay, good. That's out of the way. All right. Let's move on to, item B, which is, conditional use permit. I'm gonna let, Richard Douglas, our planning director, speak on this, if you would.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to give you a brief overview and answer any questions in regards to a conditional use permit application in which you'll have a public hearing at your next regular meeting. We received an application from James Jett for a conditional use permit for a major home occupation, in this case a custom gunsmith, for his residence at 111 Marshall Avenue. That's between Jefferson Street and Madison Street. I will not bore you with the details. You can read the staff report there in terms of what a major home occupation versus a minor, but in general, it's considered more intense, and there it goes through a higher level of scrutiny. A minor home occupation is approved administratively. Major home occupation is more in a conditional use process. We had a public hearing on this at the Planning Commission last week, and thought we had a very productive public hearing, and a number of folks in attendance, and I think we had about a dozen speakers, and I would say there's probably 70% in favor, 30 against. The Planning Commission accepted staff recommendations on a number of conditions on the property. You can see those in the staff report. And it was voted on favorably 4-2 to recommend that it move to you for a public hearing. So, for those that are not familiar with conditional uses, you have permitted uses in certain zoning districts. In this case, it's R2, and those are things you really by right. And in conditional uses, it may work, it may not work, depending on the particular circumstances. So that's why we go through this review process to see, in this case, whether a custom gunsmith is fitting into that neighborhood. So when you have your public hearing and it comes to a vote, you will basically decide whether or not the use will affect the health or safety of a person residing or working in the neighborhood of the proposed use, be detrimental to public welfare or injurious to property or improvements in the neighborhood, or be in conflict with the comprehensive plan. So, and then you'll be expected to vote either to approve the conditional use permit with or without conditions, disapprove the permit application, or send it back to the Planning Commission for further review. So, on that, I'll be glad to answer any questions about the process in general of this particular application.
I thought it was pretty thorough, and I thought the conditions were perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, move on to tab C. And this establishes Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee to draft proposed changes to the town code. We'll have a public hearing on March 18th for this as well. Pat, you want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, just a little bit. Just a couple things. This is the main thing that it establishes the committee. Once the committee is established, then you can start with officers and bylaws and stuff like that. For all that, this is what gets the committee together. Kathy and Heather did a lot putting this together, and when it was looked it over, and it seems to be up to par. The only thing that will be different on this is one of the commission members is now not gonna be a part of it. Bobby Adamson won't be a part of it, so it is 9. The term thing there, 2 years, 1 year, so every year there'll be a cycle of people that are, not necessarily going off of. So it's not all the same each
Well, after
year.
the first year, they'll all be 2 years.
Yes, they'll all be 2 years, so you do, but 1 year in, and then it's kind of split, so you're not having complete change every 2 years. That's it. This is basically the administrative process in order to get it up and running.
Pat, do you believe there'll be monthly meetings?
Yeah, that's the intent.
Because you'll need to do it just like Kathy knows, you need to put the ad in paper, and you can do one ad, say when the meetings are going to be.
Yeah, work plan.
I'm probably gonna be the bad guy in this, but I got a question. I got a couple things. One is I would like for, some discussion at some point in time about bringing, any entity that's involved with green space or anything else into this fold, and not have separate NGOs, because this is gonna grow into what it needs to be, which is,
What do you mean?
well, right now we
I mean,
have,
there's other entities that will be asked for opinions,
Yeah.
but we've tried to do that with bringing certain people in from different parts.
okay, so, but, for instance,
Instead of having one for green space and then
Yeah,
other parts of rec, it needs to be
Yeah, I-
in the same fold.
the council shouldn't have to speak to three different entities about the same piece of land, is what I'm saying, if you wanna make it a park.
100% agree, so the point of the Parks and Rec is so you can go to the Parks and Rec committee,
Right.
commission, and then
Correct.
the Parks and Rec commission can go to those.
Right,
Those-
so, okay, so.
Or
these-
have it as part of your agenda.
It's,
You're trying to dissolve the other little tiny
Right,
ones.
so what,
Have
about a
it
year
as part
ago,
of your program.
about a year ago, we reached out to a bunch of NGOs and said, look, can we consolidate you guys into some groups, okay? So, because I could literally have a meeting at 10:30 with one group and meet with somebody else at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and have the exact same conversation,
that's what this should fix.
okay?
By having the Parks and Rec commission,
Okay.
that should fix all that, because those groups will be brought together in order to, so you would have the meeting with the Parks and Rec
Yes,
about
that's
that.
what I'm
And then,
saying.
and then the Parks and Rec would have the meetings with the individuals that are doing the stuff.
Or those smaller
We have a-
NGOs may become a part of the Parks and
I just
Rec.
had a meeting yesterday with the green space people.
Eddie, I think your point is, instead of having separate, is to try
Yes.
to make it part of the same program,
Correct.
so that it's actually a part of your mission.
I think that is the eventual goal.
Okay,
That'd be
okay.
good.
But I
So you
I-
start limiting.
I do believe there's a timeline to that as well.
And then I have another question, and this is for the council, and this is just, when I read this, I just was like, is there potential for somebody to wear too many hats?
No kid.
Is there?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Because my fear is this, if you have somebody that's wearing too many hats, and is at a meeting one day, and then goes to another meeting, and somebody has a question, they answer that question because they were at this other meeting, but that may not be the actual answer because it hasn't gone through the council or the administration, if that
We
makes
have one
sense.
who continues to show up on everything.
Right,
That's, I mean, what
So-
one?
yeah, and I'm just, I can only question that
I
because
definitely would entertain any of that if we,
I just, I'm
I mean,
fearful
this
of
is-
it, that's all, I
I
just.
agree. The water's
makes
down,
sense.
the water's down the walls as well.
My immediate, and this is a work session, so this is a perfect time to be having this entire discussion. But, my first reaction to seeing this was that from my work on the planning commission and being a chair of that organization, being a board of 7 is hard to maintain.
Oh, yeah. This is
Very
worse.
hard to maintain.
I did.
A board of 10 seems unimaginably hard to maintain, in my opinion. And so once you put these down and we establish it in our town code, like that is, you may find that debilitating
Trying
to
to
your
keep it in place.
forward momentum. I almost would like to see a commission of 5, half of it, because not because I don't want all 10 of these people to be active members and to
Right.
and to give their input and to be a part of it, but
Well, I
because
think
of the
it would-
functionality aspect.
I would say, I'm not mad that it went to 9, and I'm not 100% happy with that. I could see where we could reduce it and go back down to 7 or 5, but I would say this too, one of the things was trying to bring everyone together. This is an attempt to reach out to the different organizations and bring everyone together.
So
Well, I think-
within the planning commission bylaws, you have a board of 7, but then you have appointed liaisons and appointed commissions within.
Yeah,
And so
that's
that's the way to bring in audience members, especially when they are the go-to per topic.
Right.
So like you maybe have something that is sports programming related, and maybe Steve Swope is the go-to for sports programming, right? So like you would have a subcommittee and you would name him the subcommittee chair, he doesn't have to be a board member to do that, and now he's included and he has a title and he's a part of it. So maybe having
A five-person board and then begin.
yeah, and then having the ability to create the
And then you
subcommittees.
won't have so much trouble trying to keep the 5 in place. And
You're
we
gonna
won't be
find-
continuously
yeah.
having to appoint people.
Yep,
It's part, that's.
and then
I also
getting
too,
quorum
I think if we're
and
gonna
all
do
those
this-
other things.
This is coming from experience.
No, hey,
Yeah.
Yeah, this is
I
really
understand that.
solid information.
And that's also not about any particular member, that is
No.
just about pure functionality. The planning commission dropped 3 members one year, and I remember it took us, I don't know, 18 months, I think, to be
fill.
fully functional again. And that's really hard to get through.
Understood?
So that would be my recommendation,
You
going
need
to
to get
5.
quorum too.
Yeah, getting a quorum, or who knows. Things change, people move,
I
people
think
get
5 is
sick,
an excellent number.
you know.
I would talk to the ones that, I would talk to interview each one, I really have,
What role they want to play.
and what they want to do, and I would.
No,
would
even just
specifically-
hearing that, I already have, kind of an idea of how, of a route to go
I would,
with
and
assignment.
I
With
would ask
reassigning that.
in earnest each one of them, how many other, how much more involved they are in other things.
Yeah.
When you do your bylaws too, you can, make sure you give the ability to form subcommittees and to include residents as subcommittee members and all that kind of things. But also outline the duties and responsibilities of your officers. That becomes really important. If you don't, and you sort of leave them generic, you're gonna find people, don't do their job. And then the whole organization suffers because somebody didn't say, well, I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. If it's written out,
And
it just helps clear. And you don't have to go into super detail, but
you get a ton of duplicity too.
yeah, you just make sure you know who's
Yeah.
in charge of what.
Temple?
But it looks like you got great enthusiasm there. So
Yeah,
that's
sure
one of the
does.
ones that-
It's awesome.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of spitfired. I started with 5 and then it was kind of like, well, do we want to include this? We want to include that.
I mean, I want to include all those people. I think that's
It's just in
amazing.
a
One role or
Yeah.
another.
Yeah.
Really good group of folks. And now it looks like you might have 4 more to choose from.
Huh?
You might have more to choose from.
You might have more.
Uh-oh.
No, but that was. Anyway, I'm so excited about this.
Yeah.
Super excited.
Awesome.
We'll try to get someone together so it comes out sooner and later, so you can see it again.
Okay, any other questions on this, tab E? Am I on E or D? D, tab D, sorry.
Yeah. Got his fingers in everything.
This is proposed ordinance amendments related to tall grass vegetation, outdoor storage, and I'm gonna let Richard speak on this as well.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we made some positive procedural changes related to code enforcement. And so we're recommending a couple other changes to help us do our jobs better. There are 3 changes, ordinance changes related to tall grass and vegetation, and then 3 related to outdoor storage. So I've separated those on the staff report, and I'll go through those. Related to tall grass, the first is providing 1 notice per growing season to our chronic violators. We have about a dozen of those individuals. That'll save time. It's pretty commonplace to send 1 notice out, so you don't have to do it every time we would cut grass. And I will say, in all these changes, I have discussed at length with the attorney, and I do have 1 change.
Yeah. Can I say something on this real quick? I want to tell you, thank you so very much, because for at least 3 years, we tried to get this done. And because the failure was, by the time we recognize somebody's grass is 12 inches tall, then we have to notify them, and that takes a month. So then it's 24 inches tall. Where now we notify them 1 time, and then for the rest of the time, if it's tall again, we cut it, and they pay us. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, I also want to commend Mr. Cornwell. He actually he accompanied me and Quinn on a show and tell, look at various properties. So it gives a lot of insight for him.
Frankly, I was impressed with the
There weren't that many.
Mhm.
I think that, Teresa and Richard have done an
Maybe
excellent
they
job.
Yep.
What the problems I've seen in other jurisdictions, they're incredibly more than you've got. But that's why you gotta keep working on it.
Right.
The outdoor storage is a different animal.
Yeah.
That we got a big problem with.
You do.
Yeah.
Well, and I also saw it when the grass was growing too.
Makes a difference.
Come back in June.
I had one jurisdiction, we had to cut it, and we actually, it cost us $4,000 to cut it, because it was taller than I was, and we didn't know what was under it. So we had to go out and what's it called, flail mower.
Was there a car in there?
No, there were a lot of other stuff, but what they call
Same thing they do across from Union Bank every year. They go in there
take
with
that thing to
well,
the
she come out there,
Yeah.
nail the whole thing, trees and all.
Everything
One
goes.
is out there high and they're out there with a weed eater up over their head.
Other than that, next one.
So the second proposed change, I've modified that from what you have, slightly. It's still proposing an escalating civil penalty to be a deterrent for, quite frankly, the town being a lawn service of choice. That's the last thing we wanna do. We only wanna mow out of necessity. We certainly wanna encourage individuals to either mow themselves or hire a local contractor to keep their properties mowed. I had proposed, as you can see in yours, basically an escalating that could go pretty high. Unfortunately, Mr. Cornwell's guidance were capped at $200 civil penalty per incident. So the way it should read, is still an escalation, but the first event you would not get a civil penalty, it's almost a free pass. You get the $100 administrative fee charge plus the mowing, but no civil penalty. And then the second incident, you would get a $50 penalty, $100 administrative fee, and the mowing cost. And then from then on, from the third and following mowings during one growing season, it'd be $200 civil penalty per incident, $100 administrative fee, and then the mowing cost. So it can add up quite well. I wanted to propose, as you see on the memo, that we go up in $100 increments. We did that in North Carolina, but Virginia state law prevents that. So this is really the maximum what we could do, but I think it will cut down on some work from it. And then the third charge related to instituting the civil penalty, we're required to take out the criminal element. So we would just strike that you'd be guilty of a class 4 misdemeanor. I think handling things administratively is much easier and much more successful than going the judicial route.
Yeah, we could collect those like taxes.
Well, less expensive.
So any questions on the grass part before I move on to outdoor storage? So the outdoor storage it's 3 changes, really related to definitions, and the first one is to, we have a somewhat of a definition of outdoor storage, but I borrowed from the city of Fredericksburg, and you can see that it makes it much more specific. Abandoned, discarded, unused objects or equipment, and really specific like tires, household furniture, appliances, lawn equipment, tools, motor vehicle parts, mattresses, all those sort of things that you see that we have an issue with on some of our properties. Also added, if it's an incident of harborage for rats, mice, and snakes and other vermin. So really just making it to justify us taking administrative action to clean up property. I think this will help us and give us a little bit more leeway for us to address properties administratively, and when we have to go the judicial route. And again, I like to handle administrative if we can.
Is this gonna put too much of a rap on us by turning around somebody saying it's not abandoned and it's not discarded?
That's always a problem. One man.
We got a lot of stuff stored in people's yards that isn't abandoned or discarded.
And garbage is another.
What's the definition? How long does it have to be?
Well, I think the point is to give the notice that they're in violation of the ordinance and so many days to clean it up. And if they don't, then we'll have to take action against them, whether that be go in there and clean it up ourselves or hit them with a penalty for having it.
Where is the part where it shouldn't be visible from like the street or from, that's the thing. So you can have it behind your house and nobody can see it, that's your problem.
15(1)D, it's right here.
Okay.
The outside storage on residential property more than 60 consecutive days, which are visible from adjacent property or road is prohibited.
Okay.
So do we have the definition of those materials as well defined under that as we are in this new section? I think is probably more my question.
Was
Is
it
there enough
separate?
meat in the one that we're not, this is on abandoned and discarded, but as far as storage in general, is there enough definition in the storage in general, things that need to be out of sight? Or do you feel there's anything necessary there? I mean, one thing is firewood. People dump a load of firewood in their yard and just leave it there.
Yeah, don't stack it.
Yeah, and we say there would not need to be stacked. I mean, there's a lot of administrative discretion there
Exactly.
to where, and you're never gonna get where it's a seal tight definition, but this gives us a lot more basic compared to what we have now. If we have to go before a judge, I mean, we give these examples and, you know, if it's furniture, out like indoor furniture and it's sitting outside, then that's been discarded. It's not being, I mean, it's sitting out in the weather, or appliances sitting outside, obviously, they're not using refrigerator for sitting out in the yard, you know, so.
You don't know that.
I think it's an entire process, it's a work in progress.
That's right.
I have a question about enforcement. When this, and I don't know that this is particularly a problem, but I guess I can imagine the scenario in which it might be commonplace that these incidences happen at a rental property. And if that happens, is it the occupant of the house, the landlord, or both that get?
My position is you hold the owner of the property responsible.
That's what I've always done too. The owner, whether it's an inoperable vehicle or
But
garbage.
I guess when you are sending out the violation letter, you're just then sending it to the property owner, you're not sending it to the address.
We wouldn't have any idea who the tenant was.
I remember
Yeah, but you would know the
I got
address of the
3
property.
notices for vehicles that were supposedly parked on a piece of property I owned. They weren't on my property and I didn't own any of the vehicles.
Were they there?
Yeah, well, for vehicles on
So we
private
need to go to
property,
DMV and look up the owners by tag.
we are required for inoperable vehicles, a little bit different size, but if a vehicle is on private property, then we notify the real property owner. If it's on the street, then we rely on the police, and the chief and I have been working on this for cars on the street. Then you notify the property of the owner of the vehicle, because it can be anybody leaving a car on the
The
street.
difference is under our ordinance, if it's on my property, notify me, and you come and pick the car up and tow it in. If it's on the street, you don't notify me, because I'm on the street. You pick the vehicle up, then you do a DMV check and notify the owner of the vehicle that you have it.
And I've had in previous experiences, I mean, if it's somebody else's car, I remember a case in North Carolina where it was a cousin from Maine who left their car there, and
Oh my God.
but it was an inoperable vehicle, and it was discarded. So, but we notified the real property owner, and it was up to them to notify whoever's vehicle it was, and so we treat it as a nuisance on the real property, not really the owner of the car. It's just because it's a nuisance being caused on the real
The
property.
same thing with the zoning violation. If you rent a piece of property out and property to somebody and they do something that's not permitted in that zone, you notify the owner of the property.
Yeah.
And I've had people come back and say, well, I rented it to him, I can't control it. I said, I'm sorry, it's your property, and you're responsible for the use of it.
I guess I just wanted to know if both got notified or not. Like, do you send a letter to the house? You just send a letter to the
Property
owner?
owner.
Okay.
If we know the tenant, then we may give a heads up. But a lot of times, like Mr. Turley says, you don't know who the tenant is. So
Right.
all we know, we go on.
But sometimes you find that out when you go on the property,
Sure. I mean, I don't have experience in this, obviously. I'm just wondering.
At the end of the day, you are gonna punish the property itself and the owner of the
Right,
property.
that makes sense. I just,
Because that's the only surefire way to get anything.
some
because-
people have been renting here the same property for a decade.
Yeah.
Yeah, decades. So I guess that's where, like, in my head, I can think, not that I'm not thinking of anybody in particular, I'm just,
And I do know, just from the experience here, that in working, if we work with a renter, they will, in many cases, notify the real property owner. Because they'll let us, we'll be notified in terms of the real property owner. Their renter had contacted them and because they're concerned that we were addressing an issue, so.
I think we're doing well with putting teeth into our ordinance, but we have not at all stepped up our enforcement.
I don't
And that's a
think
problem.
they have towed-
We're getting a lot of, we are only still really responding to complaints. We're not out policing our town. And that's the same thing on any physical that you can see or the sign ordinance. It's gonna be the same thing. We don't enforce it. You know, and that's what we really gotta get into. We spent all this time to get these ordinances so that you've got teeth. Now we need to enforce them so that we get the effect that we've been looking for.
I mean, I've seen a
I
lot of improvement in enforcement.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree. I mean,
I'm thinking you buy places that have had the same stuff in their yard for years and years and years and years. It's right out front, we've never done a thing about it, and yet we'll bust the guy next door.
there are cases, well, you go for the low hanging fruit. There are a number of properties where we've tried, you know, where there've been efforts in the past, and we've stepped up working with Mr. Cornwell on those, because we have to be very careful, and I'm hoping with this, for the outdoor storage, it gives us some more flexibility administratively to handle it instead of going through the courts. But we have about 5 or 6 properties, I know that Teresa's working with Mr. Cornwell on doing the summons to take those to court. Now those are, I'd much rather handle something administratively, because going through the court system is like pulling teeth sometimes. But
I don't know that, you know, there's a lot more than just 5 that I'm talking about. And the problem is that if we are not equal across the board, then a lot of the people out there think that it's okay to have stuff in their yard because the guy next door's got it in his yard. And if we're not enforcing it in a much more across the board manner, and also changing the past, we need to show a difference.
It's slow, but it's definitely.
We've got to get better.
And some of it is, and I've dealt with different courts in different jurisdictions. I have I'm county attorney in Lancaster, and I'm an excellent judge, because when I bring in a nuisance complaint, abandoned vehicle, whatever, he not only orders them to clean it up, oftentimes, well, every time I've been in front of him, he's ordered them to pay the county's attorney's fees.
Sure. Yeah.
And so that is really, you know, when you pay $900 to $1,000 in attorney's fees because you didn't move an abandoned vehicle.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good message.
We don't get that message.
We'll see what we can do with Judge Hewitt.
Okay.
yeah, we'll say, like I said, we got about 6 in the hopper. We're going to try that. We just cleaned 3 up administratively. They were pretty small, a lot of woody, vegetative debris and so forth. But we took that, we did those administratively. So I know that staff is out, and I've accompanied Teresa in looking at properties and giving her insight on how we can handle, bringing Jim into the conversation. And so some of these properties are extremely difficult to tackle, because you say they've been like that way for years, so they're not, you know, so.
I don't want to add to your workload, but I have mentioned before that the police department is one of the perfect resources for identifying really problem issues like that.
And we work more on that, working.
As well as lights that are out, things like that, and keeping a log. I know even up in Northern Virginia, they have a write-it sheet, it's called, to write it, and they put that stuff down, and they send it to our public works department or our planning and zoning, whoever, and it just goes through interdepartmental mail, and it's just a kind of a notifier saying, look, there's a car on blocks in front of 818, you know, 4th Street or something, so kind of thing.
I know with the chief, we've been working to coordinate it, and the officers have been good going out, particularly like in the cases where there can be an incident with removing an inoperable vehicle, you know, working with a new contractor on removing vehicles, cleaning up of those lots that we did. We certainly had an officer with us there, so we'll work around together. And one thing I told the chief that I've always tried to do is properties where we know we have law enforcement issues, tag teaming with them on any code enforcement violation, because often they go hand in hand. So you know, we can hit a property from that angle, just like they're hitting it from the law enforcement angle. And sometimes we can, not always, but sometimes we can, you know, we can correct situations
Okay.
like that too,
And
so.
some of these buildings come under the building official as
Well,
well.
that's a problem, we're not getting very good cooperation from.
Well, we need to.
Well, I'm hoping that at some point in time, when we bolster things and things get moving in the town where we can't be reliant strictly on one inspector from the county, especially if if the new communities actually start to be built, we're probably going to have to go back to having our own inspections.
Just force them to provide the role, because I tell you, it's actually been operating fairly smooth.
Yeah.
I think it's been a benefit.
I think it's been
Yeah.
huge.
I think it has on issuing building permits and doing inspections, but I'm talking about code enforcement for existing
Well,
structures.
they got a job to do out there, and, you know, and just like I called the county the other day about non-licensed contractors. And they're like, oh, well, that's not our job. I said, well, call DPOR and tell them it's not your job. Because it is, they have as a building official, which they are, the building official, they have certain roles they have to fulfill. And we may just have to put the pressure on. We're getting good at putting pressure on the county these days, just keep stacking it on.
Okay, one last thing. Can we put this in, water bills? So that
So
people
people
are
know?
aware
Yeah.
of what's coming
should
up
probably
once
do that.
we approve it?
I think we ought to.
Send it out with the quarterly water bill.
Yeah, it's tomorrow's. when-
Well, this is, we'll do it
Well,
next
We
time.
already voted on it yet.
Yeah,
so-
so when it becomes official.
Maybe the next one.
Yeah, the next one.
We'll
In
put it on the
the
website
July
and all that, and then
ones.
send it out with the water bill.
And I did ask about the water bill that's going out now, but this was, email was earlier this week about what happened to having communication with the citizen through that process, cause that was, you implemented that for that
Yes.
exact reason.
Yeah.
So, I've seen several water bills going on now without including any kind
Any
of,
information.
the
Yeah.
rate increase is obviously the most crucial one that I will never let go, ever, but we should be using
And that was the whole purpose
that
of doing
avenue.
it, was, well, one of the bigger purposes was to be able to get information out to the people.
And no one has approached us to put anything in with the water bills.
Not this cycle.
So
Not this
is,
side.
are you expecting it coming from here than coming
Whoever wants the
from?
information,
Well, it doesn't come from the county, it's whoever's got the thing that needs to go in, not from the council.
Okay,
Right.
right,
So
but
for this
from,
one-
For this cycle, we have nothing, we haven't had any information that's gonna go out.
okay, the concept that we have nothing to talk about with our citizens is, it's just absurd, because there's a million things that we can talk about to our citizens. But at least saying, hey, we have a new Parks and Recs thing coming, or hey, we
Or we're taking
have,
donations from palm trees.
right,
anything
or
like that.
the county is doing a spring cleanup and you can take your, oil and
Yeah,
use
I-
batteries down
Yeah.
there, or hey,
I
you
think
know.
Robin's more than right, it's a huge opportunity for us to get out to everybody that way, you know, to the ones that don't see the website and things like that. Now, I will say this, I don't know what the cost is to send a separate envelope, not with the water bill, totally separate. If we have information that we feel is super necessary, for instance, if we approve this on the 18th and start utilizing this language on the 19th, then people should probably know. Because if we put it on the webpage, for people, I'll take a stab at this, there's probably a lot of people who are having issues like this that aren't looking at web pages, town web pages.
The only thing I know, they're gonna open the water bill, we start sending a lot of generic envelopes out,
Yeah.
they're gonna be ready.
Well, I agree, and you have to be careful, you don't wanna inundate them with that as well, but I think that if you have something that's important.
Maybe we can implement a letter from the mayor each water bill. I know you
That's fine.
wanna write a letter.
I don't care, I'll do it,
No,
but,
just bullet it,
Yeah.
don't go into 85 paragraphs,
no,
just
it's simple.
bullet.
Let me just tell you that less is more, for sure. Yep, I'll do it hieroglyphics.
I like your version.
Yeah, me too. Anyway, okay, thank you.
So if there are no objections, Mayor, I think we've already technically advertised public hearing to meet the deadline, but
Okay.
I don't like to be presumptuous and schedule a public hearing if the council's not comfortable moving forward. And I will note on this, just while the planning commission has been in support, very favorable of code enforcement changes. I did not take these specific changes to them, namely because it's not part of the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
So,
It's town code.
Yeah.
The,
Okay.
and you were gonna be able to change this verbiage about the fee structure, even though we've already advertised for the public hearing.
Well, yeah, that's very vague, I mean, it's on escalating fee schedule,
Got it.
it's just I've already changed the language in here, so.
Okay.
You'll get the revised language in your packet.
Okay, so next is the amended sign ordinance recommendations, and I started reading this and, got ill and started reading it again.
You wouldn't read that for 4 years. I got one major question. Why would we allow 5 yard signs in 1 yard?
It's not for political, because political is
Right,
not
that's
allowed.
something else. So why would we ever
I saw
allow
that too.
5 yard, 6 square foot yard signs in 1 yard?
Once upon a time,
This was
in
taken
a
out
land far,
purposely
far
years
away.
ago.
Now, I think this has changed many times. I think the number 5, and I don't know if this was rediscussed in the planning commission, but long ago, it was discussed that if you had a contractor at a job doing something, that it was typical for, had some kind of build, that the GC had a sign, and then his electrician showed up and had a sign, and his plumber showed up and had a sign.
If you don't control it, that's correct.
And the real estate agent that's selling the house had a sign, and then maybe I don't even do signs, so I don't care, but
I mean, I could see.
But
2
that was
ones in
why the
building,
number
one in the
5.
building, But not 5. 5 is ridiculous.
we can
I mean,
amend
that
it
was
at the
part
public
of the
hearing.
original change years ago, was we got away from that because it allowed so many signs, and we got away from it years ago. And
That was
now it's
a-
back.
That was a recommended change from 2017-18, whenever this was revised. The planning commission did not recommend. There was certainly some discussion on that. I think that more of a consideration for the overall total square footage, not the number of it, but there was some discussion on that. But that they elected to leave that.
I mean, I would like to
same.
read, contractor can have 1 and a realtor can have 1, and that's it.
I think the square footage is how they got that too, is that right? Because you're saying 30 square feet total in area,
Yeah.
and each one is 6, so you divide 30 by 6.
So they're small, but they're
Yeah, which is
More.
really.
A 50-foot lot with 5 signs on it, going right across the roadway.
So in a lot
Not being political
A
signs.
lot of jurisdictions are doing away with, what do they call it?
They don't allow it at all.
What do they call it, little sign? They got a nickname for that.
I mean, that's what yard
I
sign.
know, they got another nickname.
The corrugated signs.
Popsicles,
Yeah.
popsicle signs, exactly right. And.
Because they're so, they just look.
Where I was in Florida recently, they don't allow them at all, period.
Lot of places
And if you were to take I'm a handyman, and if you're a handyman and you put it on the telephone pole, they call you just to get your address so they can send you that fine.
Yeah, because you put it on a pole and it's a problem,
Yeah.
but, it's just.
They call you, they say, hey, your handyman service, what's your address? Oh, I'm in so-and-so, perfect.
You
thank
see a
you."
lot of them, like the yard people, are supposed to take their sign with them when they leave at the end of
At
the
the
day.
day, right, that's
And
right.
that never happens.
Yeah.
Well, you know that's not gonna happen. Yeah.
Well, if it does, if you enforce it,
But they do look terrible.
they're everywhere.
They look terrible.
And we're getting more of them because the realtors are getting, busy and they're getting more signs and you're getting open house arrows all over the place and all that other stuff.
So if they're in the public right of way, you can take them down.
That's exactly right.
Right.
That's the other thing, and most of them are because I try to explain to them, behind the telephone poles or behind the sewer cleanouts. You don't need the corners of the lights.
This is another one we could put as an announcement at water bill.
Yeah.
But I think it's gotta be changed here. I don't want to run this through with 5 signs.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't either.
So should we reduce it to 16 square feet and have it,
2
or
2 signs.
50?
per-
signs, 12 square feet. And
12 square feet?
Put an in parentheses example,
More than 2.
contractor, realtor.
If you have a good contractor, he or she will have their sign, and then they'll have a sign that lists all the subs that are doing work. Miller Plumber, Parker Electric, Jackson carpet, whatever.
See, I never let anybody put a sign on my job.
Right.
And now the people didn't argue, because almost all of them had them on their trucks.
Trucks.
And when you build a house, most of them are only there for a day anyhow.
Yeah. Problem is, they end up bent over. and
Run over.
Run over.
Everything.
They're laying half in the road, half out of the road.
I can see two realtor.
That's just those popsicle signs that just kinda
Yep.
really.
So that would allow for two.
Mhm.
I think too.
I think Steve's right on that one. I think Steve
The whole
is-
idea was to get rid of
I
a lot
mean,
of
it's,
cars.
imagine if you have 5 lots side by side, and you got 5 in each one, coming down the road, what's that gonna look like?
Well, just go look in Orion Home Community or one of
Yeah.
those places, and they're just plastered everywhere.
I'm not against it, the change, I'm just saying, I remember the discussion, that was something that was brought
Did
up.
this address the bigger issue that we had, we've gone into, to discuss before?
With the,
River
one
ones,
sign,
yeah,
big
stuff
book.
like that.
This will accommodate the riverboat, because what it does is,
I
and I really think that's a major,
Thank you.
the bigger change on this.
Thank
It
you.
eliminates the cap, it still keeps the ratio
Yeah.
of the size of the building and the sign.
Okay.
It just eliminates the max cap of.
I think I read through it pretty thorough, hoping this would be the last time.
Right.
Everything else, I think we captured the way
Okay.
we've been talking about it. It's just the one, like 5 signs is the only thing that really hit me.
Perfect.
So there was some discussion on that, I mean, there was some good bit of discussion on that. Ultimately, it was recommended by the planning commission to say that, but it didn't go without some discussion and thought.
Okay.
Are they gonna be shocked if we, reduce it?
Like I told the planning commission, you know, they advise, they make recommendations, and just like staff makes recommendations to you, you can take it, you can leave it. I mean, that's your choice, so.
Same to you too.
No shit. Oh, my thing's on.
Okay. Very good.
Chrissy does it.
Yeah, I said we'd be out here for you, so let's do it. Can we move on to the next one? Any other questions on that?
Yeah, so public hearing has been advertised for that.
We'll be ready for the 18th. Not dead.
And then on the next one, I discussed that at length, last meeting or two, and
Correct.
just wanted to let you know that, we did hold a public hearing at the planning commission. There was no public comment
Okay.
provided on that. We would recommend, moving forward with the public hearing on that as well.
Okay, very good. Kathy, do you have anything on the Memorial Advisory Committee?
No, I have been in contact with both Mr. Lyburn and, Mr. Kelly, and I need to get back in contact with both of them and meet. It looks
Okay.
like we can meet on a Saturday,
Okay.
so I'm gonna try to push for that to happen soon.
Okay. I know Walter was signed up, but he's not here left. Okay. All right, so, Chrissy, do you have anything, citizen input you wanna add tonight? No?
Okay.
No reason for a closed meeting, is that correct? Do I understand? Very good. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.